interest in music, yeah, it starts when things become electric.
They wanna get my gold on the ceiling.
Plugging in started a music revolution.
Blues went electric. They put it on a train and took it up north and plugged them in. Hot-wired the blues.
I plug it in, I get it home, and I turn it up, it's like... Suddenly, you didn't need a horn section anymore.
I spent most of the mid-'60s not hearing anything I ever sang.
Electricity didn't just turn up the volume, it opened up a world of new sounds.
These albums are kind of sonic fantasies that could never actually exist in real life.
I fell in love with this synthesizer.
Is this how you make up all these songs? With all
we
these
let the
instruments?
machines make up the song.
You cannot put me anywhere near a synth. I don't care if it was old school synth. You know, it's still a manipulated sound.
They wanna get my gold on the ceiling.
It was like they were working on Frankenstein. All day, all night.
This is the story of how one epic innovation triggered a musical chain reaction that's still throwing off sparks today.
It's amazing. Technology already happening, which expands what can be created, because someone will use one of those things and by accident stumble into a brand new sound that no one's ever heard before.
Just think of what would happen to the music business if we pulled the plug on all the electricity.
It'll be an F for you.
Here we go. Just one more time. Right after I say, are you sure? Da, 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 yeah.
Hal, here's how I want to do it. It takes like this.
Oh, it's fun time, fun time.
Here we go. I think we'll have a different title. 17, take one.
This will be the keeper, I think.
Well, amplification in The Who is a very long journey.
I mean, I remember when The Who first were using Beatle hundreds.
Those are the first big amps we ever saw. They're called Super Beatles.
And we covered the speaker fronts with Union Jacks.
And it was such a fantastic celebration of loud music. Loud, loud, loud.
Incredibly loud. Incredibly loud.
You didn't feel like you were going to be sick. You felt like you were going to float up to heaven.
In the area of London we lived, there was this shop called Jim Marshall's. And he started making amplifiers. And he used to say, well, I've done this and I've done that. Try this one out. And they gradually got bigger and bigger.
It got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was like kind of like the arms race against other bands we played with. If Jerry had 2 Fenders, Yorma wanted 2. Yorma went up to 4, Jerry would have 4 Fenders.
Everything got louder, and the drummer had to get louder too.
And we playing them harder and harder and harder, too hard. Bob and Jerry, they were ripping their chords out, trying to sing over the din.
And I think I spent most of the 60s not hearing anything I ever sang. It made me develop a pair of lungs that I've still got today.
In 1976, The Who were recognized as the loudest band in the world, 125 decibels. Over the course of the 20th century, electricity and amplification didn't just make music louder, it transformed it. And there's no better example of that than the electric guitar.
The electric guitar is its own instrument.
magnifies every little nuance that the string gives off that you probably wouldn't hear on a regular acoustic guitar. The richness of tone and the treble, it brings that out.
It can sustain.
You can make it sound almost voice-like. You can make really gentle chords and almost ethereal sounds, and then with a flick of the switch, you can knock down buildings, you know.
The electric guitar became so popular, and it gave the power to guitarists, and it took all of us a long time to go and wrench it back out of their nasty little hands.
The first thing that happened with the electric guitar that was so important was Charlie Christian. People don't understand how important he really was. And he was discovered by John Hammond.
John Hammond helped to define the landscape of American popular music and jazz for a very long period. He put Charlie Christian together with Benny Goodman, which put the electric guitar on the damn map. He not only went to Oklahoma and brought him, he forced him on Benny Goodman, a black guy on the most famous white band leader in the country. And Goodman hated guitar players.
Early on in the 30s, jazz guitar players were the guys in the big band with acoustic guitars, and they would play chords, just chords. And it wasn't loud enough to play the melodies.
So somewhere around 1939, Gibson comes out with an amplifier with guitar. It's like $150, and Charlie Christian bought one.
Hammond was so confident that Goodman would completely freak out when he heard that a guitar player could play like a saxophonist, that he would change his mind. So he said, Benny, just do this one audition. Just, you know, he's a kid from Oklahoma, just do it. And as soon as Charlie started playing and that sound came out of the amplifier, the Benny Goodman Sextet was born.
For the first time, the guitar was not a background instrument. It used to be dominated by saxophones and trumpets. Now, where it needed any more power, just turn that amplifier up.
Well, I'm a big Charlie Christian fan. He's definitely the first rock guitarist. You can see from there to Hendrix, he's just blowing everybody away.
The fact that there was a black man playing an electric guitar, it opened up the doors, because when you hear his sound, there's a direct connection between the tone of Charlie Christian's instrument and the blues.
It's difficult to think about music without thinking about the blues. When you love music, no matter what, you like punk rock or pop music or rock and roll or jazz or rockabilly, country, they all lead right back to the blues. That's the root of all of it.
I didn't get an electric guitar until 1946. It was cost about $100 for the amplifier and the guitar. But the people didn't make enough on the farm to get no guitar too much, you know what I mean? Stand in the throne room, fell down on my knee.
When I was young, I'd never seen an electric guitar. And what we lived, it wouldn't have did me any good anyway, because we had no electricity.
This area in Mississippi gave birth to this incredible laundry list of people who are the pioneers of the blues. Honey Boy Edwards, Robert Johnson, Muddy Waters. And some of them, of course, left there.
From the
the early 1920s, you have this massive migration of African Americans from south to north. Chicago absorbs a lot of southern black migrants. People call it the Up South.
Really, what I left the South for is to make records. I couldn't find no way to make records down there. I couldn't get no connection, you know. I said, well, I'm going to Chicago.
Well, I'm gonna wait till late. Won't be back no more. Going back down.
Every bit of music that happens in the context of a space. So at some point, somebody said, hey, we can't hear this acoustic guitar over the amount of people who are here.
And you're playing without an amplifier, and the people's having a little fun, taking a little nip, they forget you there.
So let's plug it in. Let's ramp it up.
Got my mojo working, but just don't work on you.
The difference in the Mississippi Delta blues and Chicago blues was they basically just put it on a train and took it up north and plugged it in. Hot-wired the blues.
Got my mojo, got my mojo.
When the arc of the blues hits Muddy Waters, at that time with the electrification of instruments, it was all roads perfectly met in one man in Chicago in that moment. Then, when the blues invaded England, to me is one of the most important moments in music, because somebody had to recognize these guys for the musical heroes that they were.
I don't want you to be no slave.
It was fairly surreal, the transfer of this music into England. Blues was completely different to anything that we'd ever heard before, and it just had a natural attraction.
I just want to make
Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, I think, had gone to school together. They had known each other, but they meet on a train platform in London, and Mick has a Muddy Waters record, and Keith looks at him and says, "What's that, mate?" You know, and that says a lot, doesn't it? They revere the blues. You know, they've studied it. They are so heavily influenced by it.
I just wanna make love to you, baby. Love to you, baby. Love to you.
Well, I didn't quite know how to take the Rolling Stones. It sounded like they were trying to sing badly. You know, it sounded like they were going out of their way to not hit the right notes, you know what I
mean? The Rolling Stones were the bad boys of English rock and roll, and were always marketed that way. They may not have been, but that was the way they were marketed.
I just wanna make love to you, baby. Love to you, baby. Love to you.
Keith is the riffmeister. How in the world does he come up with something like Satisfaction?
That really was the moment that changed everything. When Satisfaction came out, that was it. The Stones were the #1 rock and roll band.
Prior to that song, Brian Jones had always provided all the riffs. So when they went to America and recorded Satisfaction and brought it back, the fact that Keith had played a riff at all was pretty astonishing. Equally, the fact that it had such an amazing influence on the song was quite remarkable.
I mean, it was a big deal when I learned that a lot of the stuff that I was scratching my head over, when I realized it was a different tuning, that's how he was doing that thing, you know? It all started to make sense, you know? Muddy Waters would have used this tuning a lot. This was like, oh yeah, Keith Richards was doing it.
You know, just think of it in terms of human speech, what the attitude behind making a sound.
It's like a machine gun, man. You know, that's the statement being made there. That's what Keith's doing with that sound. That's what Mick's doing with the vocal. It's this cocky, rebellious music. It's like right in the face of the oppressor. Get the out of my way. And if you're 14 years old, it's audio testosterone. The production elements that are employed on those records only enhance the message. Probably the earliest use of the fuzz tone. It's very early use of that.
The first specific unit that was made to distort a guitar opened up incredible possibilities just because you could make a note sustain for as long as that part of anything else. And it made it sound more aggressive.
The guitar can be a shield and a weapon, can scream when I can't, and can be the monster or the villain. It ought to just be a noisemaker, and if serving the song means that it's a knife coming in and slashing the painting, then that's what it ought to be. Like a birth, it reverse what I saw through the blind.
The guitar, when it's distorted, sounds threatening even at low level. If you switch off the distortion and then turn up the level, you don't feel threatened because it's a clear sound, but for some reason, the distortion, it strikes like fear.
I remember when I first got my electric guitar, it just didn't sound right. I'm like, wait a second, this doesn't sound like Revolution by the Beatles. I need a distortion pedal? I said, Mom, can I please have $25? I have to get this thing, it's called a distortion pedal, what's that? So I plug it in, I get it home, and I turn it up, it's like, and I'm so excited. My mom's like, is that thing broken? I'm like, no, doesn't it sound great? She's like, absolutely not. It sounds horrible.
Must have been 66, maybe. I was a student at the Regent Street Poly, and for our end-of-term dance, we had cream.
It's getting near dawn. When lights grow
And the curtains open. It was like, oh.
I've been waiting so long to be where I'm going. In the sunshine of your love. I'm with you, my love.
And it was just incredible a moment. And then they suddenly said, we'd like to bring on a friend of ours from the United States that who's going to play a few songs with us. And this bloke came on, it was Jimi Hendrix.
He was the one that completely upset the apple cart amongst the guitaring fraternity in London, I know for a fact, and pretty much everywhere else.
Hendrix toured in soul bands, so he really knew soul music, like dance music. He understood like what made people move.
Jimi Hendrix was a hell of an entertainer, but he was competition Little Richard. And you don't go on the stage with Little Richard and outdo Little Richard. Little Richard got rid of him. He was a genius. He's very technical on the guitar.
He was influenced by people, but because it went through his brain, it was filtered through his mind, it sounded like him.
And he was doing all this stuff with his teeth and behind his head and all of that. And I was just like, oh.
It taught us that you've got to loosen up the teeth and the back behind the head. We wouldn't dream of doing that. Can you imagine if Eric and I had done this at the time? They would have thrown at us, you know. His appearance was also outrageous. I mean, he had an afro which was sort of out of control. clothes were out of control. Sexy as well. I mean, all the ingredients needed were there. He had it all. He had fantastic technique, which no one can really get hold of.
He's such a historically aware musician. So he knows the masters. The three kings, as you call them, Albert, Freddie, and Bibi, you know. But he's also a psychedelic hippie, and he understands the whole world of record making as this world of enormous possibility.
Jimi Hendrix was the greatest electric guitar player I've ever seen or heard or had the great privilege of recording. For about 2 weeks, we were experimenting with stereo phasing, which had never been done before. We said, Jimmy, come in, we got something we want to play you. So Jimmy comes in, and we start playing the middle part of Axis Boulder's Love, where the drums come in, and it goes, and the phasing kicks in. He grabbed his head in his hands, oh my God, I can't believe you. How did you do that? That was in my dream. I want that on everything, man. So every day we were trying new things. Heavy compression, weird types of EQ, backwards tapes.
These albums like Electric Ladyland are kind of sonic fantasies. They are worlds unto themselves that could never actually exist in real life. I don't think there was any artist exactly like Jimi Hendrix who could use his guitar to mold and sculpt time and space, and just through his guitar performance could give you a complete essay on what the 60s were like, on what it was like to be an African-American man who was working in multiple genres, who was living in between certain intersections of identity. When you hear Jimi Hendrix play guitar, it's Jimi Hendrix's voice screaming through the instrument. He radicalized the use and the form and the point of what the guitar was. And so everybody started thinking, what can I do with a musical instrument? In large part because of the Beatles and what they were doing with using Eastern instruments and so on, but also I think you have to credit Jimi Hendrix for changing the game.
The impulse to change the sound of the music was nothing new. That's what rock and roll always was, always looking for something different. Then as technology continues to develop through the 70s, there's just more and more possibilities.
My first introduction to the synthesizer was through Pete Townsend when he asked me to do Who's Next. And he sent me the demos that he'd made in his own studio. He's an extremely accomplished engineer. I couldn't believe the sounds that were coming out of these demos because of the synthesizer he'd used. Back in those days, they were really complicated. It looked a bit like the old-fashioned telephone exchange with cords going everywhere.
There are oscillators which produce the sound, filters, amplifiers, and envelope generators which shape it.
First of all, he figured out how to work it, but he then took it and used it, for the first time in my experience anyway, in the most extraordinary way, Barbara O'Reilly being the classic example. He created a rhythm pattern that was not only a very strange sound, but the actual rhythm itself was rather odd, and then wrote a song around it. juxtapose it against the power of Keith Moon, John Entwistle, and himself playing guitar, bass, and drums, and then the extraordinary explosive vocal that Roger Daltrey gives us.
I'm here in the fields. I'm far from my meals. I get my back into my living.
One of my major problems was to compete with Pete's demos, which were invariably amazing, and very often I'd steal elements from the demo, the synthesizer track, and then would play that in to the band, and they actually recorded to a playback of Pete's synthesizer because the synthesizer suggests the rhythm.
Keith had terrible trouble with it. Keith used to have to play to a click track, and he used to tape the earphones to his head because he was such an animated drummer. You know, when we used to do Barbara O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again, to a backing track of that sound, it's a fifth member of the band.
The synthesizer really migrated from the music lab to the pop music scene because of Bob Moog. A wonderful man. He was a guy with the pencil protector. You know what I'm saying? Short sleeve, white shirt, pencil protector, lots of pencils. He was an engineer, and a good one. A synthesizer means massaging the electrons in space to create a new sound from nothing. Bob Moog had a certain vision, and a bunch of us played into it. Beaver and Krause, Keith Emerson, Silver Apples, Wendy Carlos, Peter Nero. A few people were starting to push the synthesizer into being an instrument that people could use. There was no school you could learn how to play the synthesizer. There was no course. You just had to pick it up and start learning. But when I heard it, my world exploded. I ran straight into the arms of electronica. And I ended up buying one of the first Moog Series 3 synthesizers. I loved it because it made me feel like I was a U-boat captain from another galaxy when I was standing in front of it. And there was this very wonderful guy named Malcolm Cecil, first-class upright bass player, and he was upright and the bass was upright. He said, I have to learn how to play the synthesizer. I said, I'll make a deal with you.
He said, would you be willing to show me how to record properly? I said, well, would you be willing to show me how to run that thing?
I'll show you how to play the synthesizer if you teach me how to become a real recording engineer.
And I said, yes.
And that began our journey together.
They were these two crazy guys, and they built this massive bank of synthesizers they called Tonto.
Modules by ARP, modules by Moog, modules by me and Malcolm.
It looked like it just took up, I don't know, several walls with patch cords and stuff. It was insane.
We made a record which we weren't sure it was even music. It was called Zero Time. Got a huge write-up in Rolling Stone because it was so wacky and weird. Stevie Wonder heard it. And the next thing we know, there's a knocking at the door, and there's Stevie in a chartreuse jumpsuit, 5 or 6 o'clock at night, with our album under his arm, and he wanted to know how we were making this kind of music.
I called Bob on the phone and said, get over here, we've got a new client.
And we let him in the studio, and we didn't wake up for another 5 years.
A boy's born in Hot Time, Mississippi, surrounded by for what that ain't so pretty.
Steve walked into that studio. He had so many songs in his head that had been pent up in there for so many years. I don't know. Motown had him on a formula.
Living just enough for the city. His father works some days for 14 hours, and you can bet he barely
Motown treats their artists, they have almost like a finishing school. So the way the artists dressed, the way they performed on stage, all cultivated so as not to offend what were considered mainstream white sensibilities.
And Steve turned 21 and he was really fed up with it. He finally reached his majority, said, I'm over. I'm leaving. And he came to New York and we just started recording.
It was like they were working on Frankenstein. I mean, just up all day, all night, and coming up with these nuances and timbres.
Very superstitious, writings on the wall. Very superstitious.
One slight touch of a button could give you a whole nother color. So Malcolm and Bob's whole job was to figure out, you know, what colors were inside of his head.
I had a 2-track tape running at all times because that's where most of the ideas came from. And I'd say, hey, is that a song? And we'd play back something that he was just musing around, and he'd go, yeah, man, yeah. And then we'd get an idea, and off we'd go. We recorded well in excess of 250 songs.
When we finally got to making an album, we said, oh, we'll take this one and that one. And somehow, for 5 years, we could do nothing wrong. Every record we touched turned to gold.
You are the sunshine of my life.
Grammys, platinum, gold.
That's why I'll always be around.
Stevie Wonder was able to take all the innovations and then just bring it to a level that was so simple to understand, was funky enough for soul people and rock people and music lovers in general to appreciate it. That's hard to do.
I feel like this is the beginning.
There's still a lot of controversy because people feel like if you introduce electronics, you're sort of changing the nature of the sound. Some people are against this, and Stevie not only embraces it, he, I think, leads the pack.
I find myself drowning in my own tears. Whoa, whoa,
It's one of the most versatile instruments. This thing can sound really clean. It can sound like a whistle, or it can sound really gnarly and like disgusting. Through the process of looking for a sound that sounds like a flute, I'll come up with something that sounds like, you know, someone getting like stabbed in the neck. This is my Mini Moog. This one's like super modified, and I wanted it because it's exactly like the one Devo used, and that they were like the kings of the Mini Moog.
The first time I was made aware of Devo, I said, you've got to be joking. They spit on people, they do all of this. They're never going to do anything. Of course, Devo came out with their first album, and they were on Saturday Night Live. I saw them on that and was totally blown away.
We really were only on college radio before that, so nobody knew who we were. It was almost like Saturday Night Live played a prank on the nation. Satisfaction, it was like my anthem. I remember playing the 45 at home, you know, on a little portable machine.
I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get me no satisfaction.
There were people that took offense to Devo covering Satisfaction, and it was because, you know, it's like guard dogs. They sniffed that we were trying to change things and that we wanted to, like, tip over the potato cart one more time. 10 years earlier, we were art students at Kent State. I just remember being kind of shocked that all of a sudden something that came from just all of us announcing that we were against the war in Vietnam was now Jeeps and tanks and National Guardsmen. After all the student protests were crushed in this country, everybody kind of went, okay, that was a little too real. They killed people. They're putting people in jail for disagreeing with the government. Let's just go back to having a good time. So the bands like Kansas and Styx and Foreigner came along, and the politics were kind of like, I'm white, I'm a misogynist, I'm a conspicuous consumer, and I'm proud of it. And we were like, what happened to Bob Dylan? What happened to all these people that had something to say and were critiquing our culture? I remember watching footage of medical evacuations, from Vietnam, and I thought, those are the kind of sounds I need. I want to make music with helicopters and with ray guns and with lasers. I want to make music where we're using sounds that have something to do with what's going on in our world. I'd been interested in synthesizers and really felt that technology was leading the way.
You've got to explain all this to us. I mean, is this how you sort of make up all these songs? With all
we let the
instruments?
machines make up the songs. We just are the human instruments. We're using technology to make caveman sounds.
For the first couple records, our record company just thought of us as this weird little art band. But Freedom of Choice, that album, still kind of robotic, but we hired a producer named Bob Margoloff.
I'm sitting there in the front office, and these two little Volkswagen Bugs come into the parking lot, and the Devos get out. They're wearing jumpsuits and hard hats with like a tank on the side with a plastic hose going up their noses. Even the jaded people at the record plant had to look at that one twice. But how did I construct the record? The same way I constructed the record with Steve and Malcolm. The records have their same root, Moog synthesizer. The synthesizer is every instrument. It depends on how you want to use it.
The electric guitar was still the primary instrument of album-oriented rock. In the mid-1970s, that really starts to change, especially with the rise of disco. Real watershed moment was when people heard for the first time Giorgio Moroder and Donna Summer, I Feel Love.
First, I took down a click track, tick, 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 and automatically the rhythm was dung, 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 dung. Whatever the synthesizer could do. But I didn't have a melody, so I started to sing a melody on top. Then Donna Summer came in and wrote the lyrics, and she sang it.
Growing up, I wanted to have all that, like R&B sound, but my voice was always really kind of pure. So when we started making music with the synthesizers, I felt at home in that kind of synthesized space. I was so caught up in producing the music at the time, but I think in retrospect, I see the door that we opened.
During the mix, the engineer gave me a delay in the bass line, and instead of doing dun 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 dun, would do daddle 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 daddle, the repeat. And now suddenly I said, this is it. The reaction was absolutely fantastic. And after a few months, it was #1 all over the place. It's the most requested song of mine.
It's not something that can easily be reproduced live. The song is totally synthesized.
Even the drums are a synthesizer.
When people heard it, they suddenly realized that there were all kinds of new possibilities for popular music that had nothing to do with the guitar, that had nothing to do even with traditional instrumentation.
That possibility to make music out of technology was something that had been there for a long time. Now there's just a new gizmo that we can do it with. Isn't that cool? I mean, you can trigger this and sync it up and wow, let's do it. There's never a kind of like a, oh, I don't think we should do that moment.
Eventually, the synthesizer becomes common enough for bands to brag that they had no synthesizer. Synthesizer came to symbolize something not natural.
All through the 80s, there's not a really authentic sounding record in the 80s. They're all highly processed.
Late 70s, those horrible synthesizers. It's hard for me to imagine that that was the golden age of recording.
I never did like synthesizer. There was talent in the drum machine, but they were cutting a lot of musicians out of work synthesizer.
Everything was determined by this regular beat. Synthesizers, get on your bike, get out of it.
I was in Cologne airport, and I was thinking, if you're going to have music, what would be the right kind of music for a place like this? It has to be non-narrative. It can't have beginning, middle, and end. It should be like a river where there's a sort of consistency to the object itself, but it's never exactly the same from one moment to the next. I studied painting, not music, and I realized when I was quite young that the most interesting form of painting that you could do now was with sound. With the synthesizer, we can make a sound that nobody's ever heard before. It's a little bit like if you went to a painter and said, I know you've got your box of paints there and you've got the 7 colors of the spectrum, but here's another 4,000 colors that you've never seen before. It's this new form that we still call music, but we should call something else.
Doing things in an electronic way, in a funny way, it's more personal because you have to create the sound from scratch. It's not just writing the note, you're actually creating the sound of the note from scratch. In the Batman movie, Dark Knight, Batman inhabits a very particular world. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to make a sonic world for this character? So I started by creating a vocabulary of sounds electronically. So now on the keyboard, I can, they're indescribable. It's not like, oh, here's a violin sound. It's, it's some abstract thing. We tried to come up with a very iconic sound right at the beginning of the movie, which is this, like a giant flapping of the wings. And slowly, during that process, I actually start hearing little bits of tune or little motifs, etc. There's a lot of snobbery and classical music, but my dad was an inventor. I grew up with technology, and I saw all musical instruments as pieces of technology. So for me, anything that made a decent noise was a musical instrument and should be incorporated into the orchestra. I sort of know what I want to say with the scene, but I usually can't find the notes straight away. So the reason I regret not going to music school is because whenever I get stuck, I wish I had a bit of Beethoven in the drawer, a bit of Mozart to go and steal from. And what happens is I don't have that. So if I'm stuck, I better come up with something myself. That's why hours and hours and hours get spent in this room with me, torturing this poor computer. Let me have one more go. The way Hollywood operates is they make these movies and they cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and basically at the end of the day, they're waiting for me to complete the music. And I'm doing it on any old PC that you can buy for like $10.50, and on a piece of software, you know, that's probably another $20. So kids, if you want to try this at home, knock yourselves out.
I make all my records in hotel rooms, pretty much, in airplanes, you know, or in car rides. I've made records in car rides, you know, especially when you have, you know, deadlines.
The synthesizer, the laptop, they're all part of the same world. The laptop, especially, is the folk instrument of our time.
Our world is just a high-tech world. You know, we are the internet generation. We are at fast pace. We need the laptops. And yeah, we're not great on guitars, but we're great with our hands, and you still make the melodies.
What is EDM? Electronic dance music. It is our new folk music, EDM.
Yes! Oh my God!
It has nothing to do with the past. It has to do with creating sounds out of space that never existed before. Sequences and sounds from a new place. We're like galactic travelers, and we're on a journey.
In an era where everything is being transformed by technology, one of the most exciting aspects of being original is reinventing what's old.
Well, we knew we wanted to get out of town to make a record.
We wanted to go to a classic studio, a place that had history.
We decided to go to Muscle Shoals, and we got to the studio, and it was pretty much just, it was empty, and no console, really. Nothing worked. All the wall treatment that used to be there in the 60s and 70s was gone. You know, my dream of, like, recording in this period piece studio, like, vanished immediately. But we had Mark Neal, and he was the engineer.
So Mark drove his preamps, microphones, and I drove down from Akron and brought a lot of gear.
And so we set up all our stuff.
No Pro Tools, 12-channel desk.
And it was almost like we were recording in the basement again, in a room that wasn't really acoustically correct. But Mark understood all these old records that we loved and why they sounded so good. Not why they sounded old, but why they sounded really good. Why the drums sounded huge, but they were mono. But they were just like two mics. And we learned that when we recorded with Mark. We called our manager's assistant and we said, we need a harpsichord now. And he found us, it's like a student model, and he drove it down from Nashville. Started playing a little line. Do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. Pat started playing, and it just immediately sounded fun and interesting. Pat got on the Mellotron and plugged in like 20 guitar pedals to it. I had partial lyrics to Too Afraid to Love You. Figured out the chords of the song. And we just started recording it.
My gears, they grind more each day, and I feel like they're gonna grind away.
And Mark got Pat to play Mark's drums. He's got this amazing sounding old Gretsch kit that just resonates beautifully. And because it sounded so good, Pat just played lighter, and it just, his playing sounded so fluid throughout the whole record.
didn't distort the tracks while we were recording. For the first time, that was going to be something that was approached in mixing. It was Chad Blake, and the only instruction was I sent him an email that was, do whatever you want, have fun, and make it sound really effed up.
Everything is early days. I mean, we've been doing sound recording for just over 100 years, and people have been building drums for thousands. If you look at a grand piano, what an incredible piece of thinking. And they didn't do it overnight. And I think the same goes for computers. We're at the beginning of this.
The technology allowed us to create new musical experiences. It allowed us our liberty, and it's going to continue to move us forward. We have to embrace change and celebrate it.
Soundbreaking is available on DVD. The companion book is also available. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS.